back to Independence Live. Tonight, as advertised, we are going to be looking at this nexus between the BBC and HSBC. And in particular, we've got a new situation which has arisen whereby private communications sent to the BBC have been forwarded by them to HSBC. So we've been in communication with the BBC about this particular scandal and how they are not covering it, and their behaviour has been seriously called into question, and we're going to discuss that tonight. But I'm going to bring back Nicholas Wilson, who joined us just a few weeks ago. Nicholas, author of the Mr. Ethical blog. How are you tonight?
I'm good, thanks, David. Good.
Thank you for joining us again. So can you please just set the scene for us with the situation with the FCA, etc., and then I'll bring in Eric, and Eric's going to describe in detail what's been going on with these communications. Okay, so Nicholas.
So I was going to just introduce the bombshell that Eric's going to talk about by giving the background of Fairhead, but there's been an extraordinary development today, which I'll just mention first.
Yeah.
Which is that if anybody remembers my previous interview, I made a complaint against the FCA for failure to take any action on an HSBC fraud, the thing I'm complaining about. And the Complaints Commissioner upheld my complaint, and the FCA agreed that they would reopen the investigation. Now, this investigation involves against HSBC and John Lewis Financial Services Limited, which is a subsidiary of HSBC. So as far as I'm aware, there are 2 live investigations by the FCA into those 2 bodies for fraud. Today it was announced that there are 2 new board members at the FCA. One of them is a director of John Lewis and sits on the chair and is the chairperson of their audit committee, and the other person is an ex-HSBC member of staff. So the FCA, in response to agreeing to reopen the investigation into those 2 bodies, has started it. Well, it's a government appointment. It's from Osborne. You see, Cameron, and now I'll go on to the thing that involves Eric. Cameron is determined to keep this fraud covered up.
Yeah.
He pleaded with Obama in the States not to prosecute HSBC about the money laundering thing, so they got away with a fine in America. But in the UK, he covered this up himself in 2010, and he has been desperate ever since to keep the lid on it. So desperate that in 2014, he parachuted Rona Fairhead, who is an HSBC director, into the chair of the BBC. And that appointment was unlawful. If people want to see my website, nicholaswilson.com, I've given details. The government has to comply with the regulations called the Public Supply Contracts Regulations 1995 when they want to procure services from a private body to work for the government. They breached all the regulations in order to get Fairhead appointed to the head of the BBC. It was a completely political act, and since there was a Panorama documentary last year, in February last year, where they exposed the Swiss leaks scandal. Since that scandal, there have been no negative reports on the BBC about HSBC at all. There was one, I've been told that I should mention one. Recently they had a computer glitch where people couldn't use their cards and couldn't do transactions. That was reported, but it was more like a puff piece because it said HSBC were on top of it and they were sorting it out. It wasn't really a critical news, but there have been no critical news stories. HSBC last year were fined £28 million in Switzerland, $285 million in America. They're being prosecuted in Germany, France, Belgium, Argentina. None of this is reported on the BBC because the chair of the trustees of the BBC is Rona Fairhead. So now we can go over to Eric and he can tell us what happened with him.
Okay, sure. Good evening, everyone.
So Eric, you actually contacted.
Pardon me, David?
Right, sorry, you contacted BBC in regard to the fact the appointment of Fairhead was illegal, and that you did request an interview on the basis that this is a breaking news story.
Sure. Let's just be clear what I did. When you guys first broadcasted Nick, maybe on the 4th or 5th of January, I can't remember. It was really early in 2016 or early this month. And I felt compelled to have the, your stream embedded on Kilter, because I thought it was a really interesting stream. So this was when I first became aware of Nick's case. And what I did following that was I contacted Rona Fairhead directly, merely requesting an interview. I just wanted to. I later found out that she's only ever given 2 interviews pre the Mar show the other morning in her entire career. So naturally I was rejected. But I'll read out what I got sent back. I initially sent an email, as I said before, requesting an interview with Rona Fairhead, explaining that I sent a link to the stream that you guys did, and I also said that it'd be good to maybe clear up some of the accusations that have been levelled against her, merely in a completely impartial basis. I wasn't there, wasn't haggling or hassling her. So I initially got an email back from
Eric.
Yeah.
Could you just say that you didn't mention, in your first email to her, you didn't mention HSBC at all?
No, did not mention HSBC at all. And if anyone wants a record of that email, I'll happily forward it on to them. I merely said that, I'll read out the initial email I sent, okay? The very first email I sent to Rona Fairhead. I'm emailing about a story that is due to break in the coming weeks about Miss Fairhead's appointment to the BBC. I'd be keen to interview in advance of this via a live stream Skype, if possible. As the accusations are somewhat damning, you might want to listen back to an interview published on our platform with regards to the claims Kilter link to the first interview you did with Nick. Furthermore, I'd like to chat with her for an hour or so to hear her side of the story, to possibly quell these claims in advance. As I said, a major independent journalist is due to publish something about this in the coming weeks. My very best regards, Erik Sandberg. Now, the first email I got back was from a June Prunty, whose email signature is PA to the chairman, PA to Rona Fairhead. Very short email. Dear Mr. Sandberg, thank you for your email of 11th of January. I have forwarded it to HSBC as it is a matter for them. Best wishes, June.
This is quite something. Quite something. I mean, this.
Yeah, as Nick said, I didn't mention HSBC once in the original email. I mentioned the BBC and that I wanted to interview her. So that was the first email I got back, and I'll read another. I didn't reply to June Prunty, and her email was dated. That was a couple of days later, and then I got an email from Catherine McLeod about a week later. Dear Eric, many thanks for your email, which has been forwarded to me by the chairman's PA, i.e. June Prunty. As you know, we have also forwarded this to HSBC. While any allegations relating to HSBC are clearly a matter for them, there were 2 allegations relating to Rona Fairhead's role as BBC chairman that I felt it was for us to respond to. Firstly, Rona was appointed as BBC chairman by the DCMS, and any questions about this should be directed to the DCMS press office on the allegation that the BBC has not been covering the HSBC stories because Rona is BBC chairman. The BBC Trust has no involvement in day-to-day editorial decisions, including individual news stories, and Rona has had no discussions with the BBC, the executive or the editorial team regarding HSBC coverage. I hope this addresses all the points made. I then got back to her and said, my original email was requesting an interview and you've not responded to that at all. It's almost as if they've not read my email at all, They've just looked at it, they've obviously skimmed the email and just, panicked or something. I can't think of any other rational reason for them banging on about HSBC all of a sudden.
And what was quite concerning here, Nicholas, just a second here, is that you then received an email from a Catherine McLeod, and I'm just quoting here, it is our policy to direct any media queries relating to external organisations to them. So they're actually claiming that it is their policy to pass that on. to somebody
Well,
else. Somebody's
well,
making accusations, you know.
yeah, well,
So, Nicholas,
could I? Yeah, I mean, could I just say it's important to mention in Eric's first email to them, the subject line was Rona Fairhead unlawful appointment. So it's nothing to do with HSBC.
Yep.
He was right. He wanted to talk to her about my accusations about her appointment being unlawful.
Yeah.
And this email, as you quoted there, that I got from McLeod, saying that is their policy. If that's their policy, then they're breaching the Data Protection Act. What if Eric had written to the BBC about, say, child abuse at a care home? Would they forward the email to the care home? I mean, his email was about her unlawful appointment, and it contained a link about our interview when I discussed HSBC fraud. So, you know, arguably, he's sending a confidential email to the BBC about HSBC fraud, and they send it to HSBC. This is a major scandal.
Yeah.
Well,
Sorry, Eric.
yeah, they also replied to myself and Nick, saying that it was their policy to forward on there was a policy to forward on emails to third parties, and I've dug a lot to find out what the BBC's Trust's email policy is or press policy is. There's nothing. They don't have a policy. You know, for an organisation that's funded by the licence fee payer, they don't have any transparency about what their press policy is about third-party emails, etc. They've just made it up, to be honest, because I can't find anything. And if they'd like to reply to me by email and send me a link, show me their policy, and then I'd gladly retract those statements.
I'm quite sure it's breach of the Data Protection Act, because that means HSBC now have your contact details, Eric. And and the purpose of your email to the BBC was not anything to do with HSBC. So they have. Even if you were just writing to the BBC saying, "I have evidence that HSBC committed fraud," would they then forward that on to HSBC? It's extraordinary behaviour. It's third world corruption, and it's stupid.
And so was it 2 days ago we had the Andrew Marr show, and a very cosy little interview. So this was something like the third ever interview with Rona Fairhead ever on television. Absolutely no interrogation. It was basically, here's an opportunity for you to try and pretend that everything's okay. And what she actually said was, she made an apology for, and sorry, Nicholas, can you give me what the term was?
She apologised for any reputational damage.
Reputational damage.
We care about the reputation of the banks. I mean, we don't care. We want to see them in prison. We don't care about their reputations. It's unbelievable. She didn't apologise for all the deaths in Mexico, all the beheadings of all the drug cartels, all the murders. She didn't apologise for that. She apologised that the fact that HSBC's reputation might have been damaged. Extraordinary.
And this is a very visual example of the establishment and how it works. I mean, you know, the theory of the interlocking elites, as Noam Chomsky might put it. So where do we go from here? What can we do now that we've visualised the mechanisms of the interlocking elites and the way in which they're passing off the responsibilities to deal with something, or just even respond and answer to something which is extraordinarily serious, the unlawful appointment of a BBC trustee? I mean, where are we going to go from here now? What's the next part of the discussion?
Well, regarding the barristers looking at it at the moment, I want to take out a judicial review in the High Court to challenge the appointment of Rona Fairhead, because it was completely corrupt. If you remember from my previous interview, during the time that people were speculating about who would be... In fact, I've just recently blogged. Cameron announced in beginning of May in 2014 that he was determined that a woman was going to be the chair of the trustees of the BBC. Then shortly after that, it was announced. Now, I believe this was a decoy, because I think Cameron had decided then that it was going to be Rona Fairhead, because that was the time. Apparently, the headhunters who appointed her is a firm called Saxton Bamfield, where the BBC Director General's wife is a partner. That was who apparently appointed Rona Fairhead at a cost of £36,000. Now, that process started in May, And then towards the end of May, it was announced, and again, I think it was a decoy, that Sebastian Coe was interested in being the chair of the trustees. And then Cameron announced that he was very excited about Sebastian Coe's interest in the job, having previously said he wanted it to be a woman. So it makes me wonder. But then shortly, after a bit of press speculation for a couple of weeks, couple of months probably, Coe dropped out, said, I'm not interested anymore. Then conveniently, because he was a decoy and it kept everybody's attention away to what was really going on, and then it was announced that it was going to be Rona Fairhead. And it was a complete left field announcement. Nobody in the media or anybody had any idea whatsoever that when the shortlist was published, she wasn't on it. There were various other potential Sardino, a woman from Pearson, Marjorie Sardino, I think her name was. She was a potential, but Rona Fairhead was never mentioned. So all the media, when it was announced, they said, well, why? She's got no broadcast experience. She's had no television experience whatsoever. She's a director of HSBC. That's why. And I'm stunned on Twitter that a lot of people think that she's an ex-HSBC director. She is a current HSBC director. She earns over £500,000 a year from HSBC, and she earns about £110,000 from BBC. But she says her priority is BBC, which I think means she must be pretty stupid.
Your words. Okay. Eric, what is your next move? I mean, there is this issue with the data protection. Are you following that one up, or what's going on?
Well, I mean, I'm not. I'd like to just reiterate what Nick said there. It's quite kind of ambiguous how many days a week she works. It's 3 or 4 days a week. 3 or 4.
Two.
I mean, my boss wouldn't let me away with saying, "Oh, I'm going to work 3 or 4 days a week for a salary." I'd like to go back to a news story this morning, actually. That involves the FCA, the new appointment of. Do you want to talk about that, Nick? The new head of the FCA.
Yeah. Well, to me, yeah. Well, yeah. The other point is, apart from these two directors, John Lewis and HSBC people, it's been announced that the new chief executive of the FCA is going to be Andrew Bailey, who's from the Bank of England, and he said in 2012 that HSBC is too big to prosecute. So you've now got what Cameron and Osborne have done. They've appointed an HSBC person to a director. They appointed a John Lewis person to a director. They appointed a guy as a chief executive officer who's already announced publicly that HSBC are too big to prosecute. But FCA are supposed to be investigating £1 billion fraud by HSBC, which involves John Lewis. So this is Cameron and Osborne desperate to keep the lid on this fraud. I don't think the FCA are ever going to do anything, because what they agreed to do with it, they agreed is they would reconsider their original decision to take no action. So once they reconsider it, they might come back and say, well, we're not going to take any action, and that is exactly what they will do. But I won't. I'm not going to give up. Some of these people should be in prison. I mean, some of these people in the FCA, misconduct in public office. I mean, some of the lawyers I worked with, some of the people at HSBC, they should be in prison for fraud and conspiracy to defraud. But these people, Cameron, Osborne, FCA personnel, Tracy McDermott last week misled the Treasury Select Committee in Parliament. Your SNP, Scottish SNP, George Caravan, he questioned Tracy McDermott about this complaint with the Complaints Commissioner, and she just brushed it away, and she said, oh, it doesn't matter because HFC Bank, which was a subsidiary of HSBC, they're not even trading anymore, and it all happened a long time ago. That was completely disingenuous, because they have a current complaint from me about John Lewis Financial Services and HSBC, and she didn't mention that. She completely misled Parliament. And as a result of that, a week later, here we have Osborne appointing Andrew Bailey and an HSBC and a John Lewis person to the FCA. These Tories, these crooks, are so crooked they cannot see that the public can see through it, what they're doing. They seem to think that we're all stupid and they can get away with this kind of corruption. They can't, and you guys are showing it. I mean, it's fantastic that you're supporting me. And finally, we got some SNP support. This has got to, it's going to come crashing down very soon.
Well, that was the next point I was going to bring in, was actually that the fact was that the George Caravan had probed there on the Commons Select Committee, the Treasury Select Committee, about the issue. But again, it's obfuscation, it's avoidance, and there's always this kind of tactic of it doesn't matter, as a way of sidestepping serious accusations and responsibilities.
I've been in contact with George Caravan since that meeting. And I've suggested to him that he asks me to be a witness at the next Treasury Select Committee meeting with the FCA, because it's all very well interviewing these people who just sit there and lie and laugh about their responsibilities. But if there was somebody like me and perhaps other people who have been, people who are victims of RBS fraud and all the other bank fraud, there need to be some members of the public sitting giving evidence at those hearings. Because otherwise it's just grandstanding and it's just theatre, where the MPs behave like judges and they question these people and they just give their stupid, dishonest answers, and then it all finishes and nothing happens. But I think if there's some real evidence given by real people, then I think people would realise what's going on here.
Well, I think we can definitely continue and follow this one up. I think we should have George Caravan on as well, so that we can discuss this.
That would be great, yeah.
Discuss this one together. I mean, Eric, what are your thoughts on what's been happening with the Treasury Select Committee?
Yeah, I followed that a little bit. I mean, obviously Tracy McDermott, she was obviously a temporary head of the FCA. She never really took the job full time. And this new guy is Andrew Bailey, Nick. Yeah.
Sorry, did you ask me a question?
Yeah, so Tracy McDermott was the temporary head of the.
She was acting CEO.
Acting head of FCA. I mean, the whole thing with the FCA is a guy that managed to get HSBC to pay out millions of pounds in damages or fees with the Swiss wing. He was deemed too harsh in the banks. I mean, that's just kind of crazy that
Well, I think that was Wheatley, Martin Wheatley. Now the media. All the media say that he was got rid of because he was too harsh on the banks. I think that's nonsense. I don't think he was harsh at all. If you look at the fines that are imposed by the FCA compared with the fines imposed by the Securities and Exchange Commission in America, it is peanuts what the banks are fined here. It's like a day's profits for them. It's peanuts. Martin Wheatley wasn't tough on the banks at all. I think the reason he was got rid of is because he was in charge when the famous cut and paste job, if you remember, I did a Freedom of Information Act request to the FCA. They asked HSBC what to say to me, copied and pasted HSBC's answer, which was 100% untrue, and forwarded that to me. And that was dealt with by the Treasury Select Committee last year, the beginning of 2015. And I think they got rid of Wheatley because he's now exposed, because the FCA and HSBC were colluding together to cover up the fraud. He's exposed Cameron, because Cameron covered it up in 2010. So he's a loose cannon, and I think they got rid of him just because of that. And now they put in Andrew Bailey, who said they're too big to prosecute anyway. So it seems like they're perfectly safe now.
Okay, I've got a question here from Colin Veach as asked. He said, with the legal profession having shared school dormitories with all these individuals, how can you rely on the English court system and the old school networks? Is there any other avenue of appeal or another form of official investigation?
Well, I have to say that I'm not cynical about the court procedures, the system. I think there are some extremely good High Court judges, and I think if something like this came before a good High Court judge or a Supreme Court judge, they wouldn't be swayed by Cameron or Osborne or HSBC. I think they would give the right decision. But, I mean, I was a whistleblower. I didn't work at the bank. I worked for a firm of solicitors called Waitmans. They were committing fraud. There's another firm called Reston's. They were committing fraud. And you don't get whistleblowers in solicitors' firms. because they all make lots of money. I mean, if they're committing fraud and making lots of money, like the guy at Reston's, he lived in Andorra, tax haven Andorra, and flew his own private jet to the UK. That's how much money he was making from this fraud. So, and lawyers, they each of them, especially in a partnership, they each of them have a duty to report to the Law Society if any of the other partners are doing something dodgy. They don't do it because they will never work. I've never worked again in the law, apart from a couple of consultancy jobs. They won't do it. Lawyers don't blow the whistle. Accountants don't blow the whistle. Bankers don't blow the whistle. They all earn so much money from their fraud and corruption, it doesn't happen. That's why I spent 12 years trying to get this out there, because they circle the wagons and they all protect each other. This has been covered up by the Solicitors Regulation Authority, by the Ministry of Justice, by every the only establishment who didn't give me a hard time was the Land Registry, which now is going to be privatised by Cameron. But the HM Land Registry, because I wanted information about people where they had these charges on their property, they were very cooperative and they helped as much as they could. But apart from them, I hit a brick wall in every time I've tried to do something about this. And this is why I've said to Eric that this what happened with his email, I think, is a chink in the armour, because it proves, A, that the BBC are certainly not independent, and they receive something ostensibly about HSBC, and they forward it straight to HSBC. Now, what is going on there? I mean, the public should know about this. Well, they do now.
Do you think there should be a public response to this? I mean, for example, withholding the licence fee on the basis that BBC are in breach of charter?
Well, do you want to answer that, Eric? I mean, I'll just say I did write to Tony Hall, who's the Director General of the BBC, and I sent a copy of this exchange, and I said to him, can you explain what's going on? This is breach of the Data Protection Act, and it shows that the BBC is not independent. And I told him I was being interviewed today at 8 o'clock, and could I have his response before this interview? But typical arrogance of the BBC completely ignored me. So it's that the public should know, and we should tell people about this. If they want to ignore us, then it's their issue. But Eric, what's your thoughts on that?
David, you were breaking up there. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, just basically, do you think it should be like a public response? And one of the things that we do in Scotland a lot, and it's happening across the rest of the UK, is withholding the licence fee on the basis that the BBC are in breach of various parts of their charter. Yeah,
I mean, I really like the BBC. I like a lot of its content. I don't like it as how it works, but I like a lot of its content, you know. But I mean, I think we all know that, you know, during the referendum, it's the way, especially there was a lot of criticism directed towards BBC Scotland for sure. You know, actually, I did an interview with a Professor John Robertson who analysed the BBC and STV in detail and published a report on it. And STV have actually gotten a lot better in terms of impartiality. Actually, STV are arguably more in favour of the kind of pro-indie people, but BBC Scotland is according to Professor John Robertson's report, and it's on his blog if anyone wants to check it. If you read Professor John Robertson's blog, you'll see that BBC Scotland has actually got worse in terms of, you know, level playing fields and impartiality. So, and on Sunday morning, I think it was, Rona Fairhead, Mark kept questioning her about a Scottish channel, or you know, not a BBC Scotland, but a channel that's dedicated to Scottish news, you know, that can be, I don't know, it might have it broadcast nationally. I don't know. I'm not sure. But again, she was very ambiguous about it and just kept saying that everything's on the table. Everything's on the table. They can't really seem to make any decisions. They're cutting, you know, I mean, what about the £750 million that was the licence fee paid had to pick up for over 75-year-olds having licence fees waived? You know, that was part of a Conservative, part of the Conservative manifesto. And the licence fee payers having to pick that up. £750 million, the licence fee is having to pick up. For if you're over 75, then that's fine. You know, I agree. You know, I'm all for over 75-year-olds not having to pay the licence, but what I'm not for is the Conservatives forcing Rona Fairhead basically to impose this upon licence fee. during a Conservative general election campaign.
That's what she's there for.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, if you can, I just I probably mentioned this in the previous interview, but it's important in this context. Cameron wouldn't be a prime minister if the Sunday Times hadn't covered up this story. What happened last year in February last year? I was working with a Sunday Times journalist called Tom Harper, and he was going to expose this HSBC fraud and Cameron's involvement in the cover-up in 2010. The day before it was due to be broadcast, it was published. It was spiked by the Sunday Times. At the time, the associate editor of the Sunday Times was a woman called Camilla Cavendish. She had lunch with Cameron at Chequers in February last year. Shortly after the article was spiked, it was announced that she was going to leave the Sunday Times and start working at number 10 in the policy unit with David Cameron. So the Sunday Times spiked this story. Cameron would not have been elected last year if that story had been published. So it was covered up and she got a job at number 10. That's what's going on. Fairhead's been put there to do the government's bidding and to shut them up about HSBC.
Well, I'll just take a glass of water there. So I think we've pretty much covered the issue, and what's happened essentially is that all the things that we suspect have been shown quite clearly in public, and we've been discussing it quite publicly tonight. So I think if maybe Nicholas, would you like to make some closing remarks if there's anything we need to cover, and then we can wind things up?
No, I'd like to thank everybody for their support, because I'm feeling much more empowered these days. I mean, I've been suicidally depressed in the past few years at times because I'm being ignored, constantly ignored, especially by the BBC, who just patronise me and insult me. But it's great that you guys are picking this up. It's great that George Kerevan is picking up. There was an article about me in the Financial Times today. I'm starting to make inroads into the mainstream media.
Yeah.
So, if we all work together soon, the questions are going to have to be asked of Osborne and Cameron exactly what they are doing, because it's utterly corrupt.
Okay. Eric, do you want to just make a closing remark?
No, also, congratulations on that article in the Financial Times. I saw that today, Nick, and I'm glad George Kerevan's taken up your case in the Parliamentary Committee. I hope George continues to push your case, because I've been on your blog and it's all there in black and white. So good luck to you, and we'll continue to support you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, so thanks very much. Erik Sandberg has joined us from Kilter.com. We've been very happy to collaborate once again with Scotland's very own social media platform, Kilter.com. If you don't have an account, get one. Nicholas Wilson, thanks very much once again. This has been quite invaluable. We're going to continue with this. We're going to keep this one going. I think we're going to probably speak to George Kerevan, and we'll see if we can, we'll try and follow this as we go through, and we're going to try and help it make its way from new media into mainstream media as well. Okay, so thank you very much to our guests tonight. Kevin's been doing the tech. Thanks very much. It's been great. Lots of people have tuned in. Thanks very much for your questions. And we'll see you again quite soon. So for me, David Independence Live. Peace.